Hi, I'm Center Director Jody Singer, and I'm really happy to be here today. I'd like to introduce the Associate Director, Steve Miley, who's also helping me, joining me today. Today, we're here to talk about what it means and give you a little bit more details of going from stage 4 into stage 3 and what that really means to our team and how we're covering it. I hope the biggest takeaway that you have from this discussion is that moving to stage 3 enables us to continue to make progress on our vital agency work, both at home and on site at Marshall Space Flight Center and at MAF. And most importantly, we want to do it safely and make sure that your health is at the forefront of our plan. I want to thank you for what you've been doing. You've been doing a lot under extraordinary circumstances. Every time I look and see the progress we're making, it is just fantastic. So I really want to thank each and every one of you for the hard work during this stressful pandemic. With that in mind, I'd like to talk about what stage 3 means for you. For most, it's mandatory telework, and that continues. The progress can continue on site, from home, in our offices. We're exercising a safe work protocol, which includes guidelines that we follow, and following those guidelines are imperative. In stage 3, it means that we can progress and can make continued on site work. We began transitioning on August 3rd. And you may have asked, well, what does that mean to transition into stage 3? When we looked at what was going on, we saw that there was a downward trend in the coronavirus cases in the area surrounding Marshall Space Flight Center. And today we continue to focus on that trend. We not only look locally, but we look statewide. And we look at that data every day to make sure that we look at specific analysis of understanding in our local community and an area that's about 50 miles radius of the center. We have learned more about the virus since March 13th. We know more about how to keep ourselves and others safe, and we believe that if we follow our guidelines and procedures, we can do that. We better understand about how to mitigate the risk of the coronavirus transmission, which allows us to conduct our work safely with precautions that we have put in place. We call it our Safe at Work protocol, which is important for everyone, and I stress everyone, to follow. We'll talk more about this in a later discussion. So in stage 3, we'll continue to prioritize more mission critical work. We'll work to return on site gradually. We're also trying to see what other services we can fully turn on and that we can safely turn on. An example would be bringing on food trucks, food services. We haven't done that yet, but we'll be glad to let you know when we do that. We'll have to make sure that we keep things safe. But for most, it remains basically the same, a lot of the same. Mandatory telework continues for the majority of our center. All employees who are able to telework will continue to do so. Many of us can effectively perform our jobs and keep our missions moving from our house. So access to the center remains restricted to those allowed on site for approved mission critical and mission essential work. Your supervisor will let you know when and if you are expected and approved to be on site. I recognize that during this time that many schools are holding classes virtually. I know that Madison and Huntsville City Schools and Madison County. We recognize that this puts an added strain on employees trying to work from home and to balance the needs of your family and the things that you have to do at home. I want to reassure you that regardless of the center's operating status, you'll be supported and continue to telework to meet those needs. You may continue to reach out to your supervisor if you need to get supplies from your office during this period. And Steve is going to tell us just a little bit more about how we decided what we would do and how the work is being approved as we stay in the on-site work that we're bringing on during stage 3. And we also still stress, and Steve will stress it too, how your safety remains a priority. Steve, would you mind going through that for us? And please talk about how we decided what work to approve under stage 3.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jody. Like Jody said, within stage 3, there's not going to be a huge change in the total amount of employees that are coming on site. There will not be sort of what you would call a mass return to site of employees. The work that we had already authorized under stage 4 is continuing, and even some of those tasks have already been completed, and those are no longer being conducted. But at the same time, we have new tasks that are being authorized and conducted now. And so we have a process for how to notify the employees that are affected, that are going to be working on those tasks, and that they will be returning on site. They're receiving briefings from their task leader or supervisors as appropriate for what's going to be involved with the specific work that they're getting authorized to work on. We still have our executive committee approval that we do at the center for every task that we turn on. So we review those through a process of looking at what building is involved, how many personnel are involved, what equipment and facility is needed to conduct the task. And for those who are affected and are going to be working on that task, they'll be notified by their supervisor and given permission to come on site. One thing that I wanted to remind is that for all of our work that we're doing on site, it is all being done on a voluntary basis. And what that means is that if for any reason you have some issue or some concern you have about being on site and having to be around other people, whether socially distanced or not, if you have any concerns about that, you'll not be required to do that. So that's strictly going to be on-site work, will strictly be continue to be done on a voluntary basis. It'll be added to very methodically and gradually, taking into account the state of things in our local area and in our state. And so if anything were to change in a dramatic way about how the virus is being spread or how the safety precautions could change for it, then we might modify and adjust what we're doing as far as our on-site work goes. But one of the things that I know we've had questions about is for requests for other projects that have not yet been authorized. And I would just say this, that if you're involved in labs or areas that have work that is not yet authorized, it may be reviewed, and based on the risk involved with doing that work, and again, how many people are involved, what facilities are needed, that some of those additional tasks may be authorized in the future. But in order to do so, we'll look at a very detailed, specific, and customized work plan to facilitate that work. All along the way, the center is cleaning our work areas and high traffic areas on a regular basis. We're making sure that hand sanitizer, PPE are available in all the locations where the work is being conducted. And also, we remind those of everyone who is returning on site, even if you're only coming on site for a brief time to do a short task, or to say if you got supervisor permission to come on to retrieve some belongings, that the safe at work protocol is paramount. So you need to make sure, if you're working on site on a task or coming on site for any other reason that your supervisor approves, that you follow the designated safety protocols. And if you have any concerns about anything you see or what's going on, you definitely need to speak up, and definitely speak up to your supervisor. But we've learned from what we've done so far in our areas that wearing masks really work. The masks definitely make a difference and help to prevent the spread of the virus. So obviously, if you're not well or not feeling well or normal, then you would not want to be a candidate for coming on site to do work. And this is one way that, just by checking yourself, checking your own temperature, and just monitoring yourself for potential symptoms, that's one way you can look out for not only yourself, but for everyone else that you may be working around on site. Jody?
Thanks, Steve. And again, we cannot stress enough, wearing masks, washing your hands does make a difference. We're able to keep cases from spreading on site by being vigilant, and we will continue to pay attention to trends and understanding the latest information to keep our workforce safe and to keep us productive. It's really important that we take personal responsibility in this effort. We've said over and over, and we stress it, you are the most responsible, you're the most important to us, but you are responsible for your health and the safety of others and of yourself. It is important to follow these steps like distancing and mask, even when off center, when you're taking a lunch break, when you're commuting. Be aware of your surroundings, follow the safety protocol. We can only continue to add work to the site and keep one another safe and healthy by doing this. If I give you a little bit more about my expectations, I do expect the supervisors to maintain avenues for you to be able to ask questions and raise concerns. It is critical that you stay informed through many of the avenues that we have offered, which includes Marshall information, NASA people, the employee support resources from the ODEO, to the Employee Assistance Program and others. You know, it's one other thing that I really want you to focus on and be aware of is taking care of yourself and trying to avoid any type of burnout. I know that being attached to the computer, being on Teams, it's a blessing, but it also can be something that if you're not careful, you can burn yourself out. Personally, I like to step away, talk to my family, talk to my pets, my dogs, and many of the times they ask me questions, so I have to get offline and talk to them. But we also know that there's things that you have to do. If you have children around or family members, we know you have to balance your work life. And we recognize that there's challenges on the home front with the persistence of workforce and home, and maintaining that balance is so critical. I'll also remind you that there is a 20 hours excused leave for each pay period for available for civil servants if you have to use it because of being able to take care of your children or family member. Also remember that through NASA's telework policies, there are tools and teaming that are allowing us to remain productive at home and accomplishing our work, but it does mean that you have to balance this. So we have to do all these things and say all these things because I really want to stress that you are the most important part of what we're doing. With that being said, I want to make sure that we take time to answer many of your questions that you have asked us to do. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Deputy Director Paul McConnaughey and Engineering Director Larry Leopard to join us, and we'll be taking some questions that you guys have asked us for. So first, I would like to ask Steve to help me answering one of the first questions. We've talked a little bit about the procedures that we've looked at and looking at work to go from stage 4 to stage 3. But the other question is, how can we make the move to stage 3 when we have more coronavirus activity in our area? Steve, can you help me answer that?
Sure, Jody. It's true that in total, there are, we have experienced more COVID-19 cases now than when we moved into stage 4. But what's different is we learned a lot more about the virus and how it's transmitted and how to keep ourselves safe and both at home and in work. One of the things that we looked at in going to stage 3 was we realized that we actually had a downward trend in the new COVID-19 cases for our surrounding areas, locally to Marshall. We will, and we have a slide that we can show you that you'll be able to see on the downtrend in the cases, both in terms of our local county areas, and if you look at about 90% of our civil servants who would be working within our commuting area. And so both of these ways of looking at it showed a 14-day downward trend, and that downward trend does continue. We are going to continue to watch this. We're going to continue to monitor the CDC guidance and other agency and NASA headquarters guidance about how to manage the risk from the virus. And we also noted that we also have a statewide mask order for the state of Alabama and that was extended through the end of August for right now. We're monitoring what's going on overall at Redstone Arsenal with the Army leadership, the city and state governments in Alabama and Louisiana. We're continuing to monitor that information too, and various selected areas have begun to reopen. And the only other thing I was going to mention is that one of the things that we've noticed is our lessons that we've learned from dealing with the virus so far have given us additional confidence. And it's not something that we're going to be careless about at all, but something that we want to just be ever vigilant about, that we talked before about doing physical social distancing, hand washing, regular hand washing, and wearing face coverings. We've got enough controls in place right now for on-site work where we've got those tasks being monitored and managed in such a way that we're protecting the folks that are doing the on-site work. And as the CDC modifies or evolves their recommendations, we'll stay tuned to that. And so basically, it's allowed us to allow continued work at the center, very important, mission essential, as well as mission critical work to continue while also protecting folks using our PPE and procedures. We'll also be continuing to work with our Marshall Occupational Health Office and medical team, as well as guidance that we get from the agency chief medical officer on how things are going and how to mitigate any risk of spread with the virus. Jody?
All right. Thank you, Steve. So the next question will be for Paul. The question that was asked was, how is it determined that Marshall should have been in stage 4 months ago, and what criteria will the center management use to determine if a return to a higher level stage is necessary? Paul?
Okay, Jody, that's an interesting question. So back in March 13th, which seems like a really, really long time ago, when we made the move to stage 4, it was really out of a sense of caution. And we were dealing with a lot of unknowns, as Steve talked about. A lot of things the nation did not know about the virus. There's a lot of conflicting information. And so we moved to stage 4 out of a sense of caution and trying to protect the workforce and ourselves. And the criteria for moving back to stage 3 was different than what was required to get us here. And that's due to what we watched, as Steve talked about the data. We're looking at the trajectory of the cases. They're being closely monitored both at Marshall, the local levels, both here in Madison, Huntsville, and Michoud, statewide. And we look very carefully at like the commuting radiuses here around Huntsville and the commuting radius at Michoud. We're watching continuously the CDC recommendations, and then also the agency recommendations, as our sort of our head doctor within the agency often gives us a more conservative view than what the CDC may give us based on his view of the data. So we take all that into account in terms of our discussions and our decisions. So we're communicating with these health officials, both at the agency level and the local level, who can give us an indication of whether or not we need to go to a particular direction one way or the other. We're not keeping any decision off the table in the discussions we're having. If things get worse, we could go back to stage 4, get better, we could go to stage 2. It all depends on the data that we're seeing in the environments and the risk we're assessing. So if the increase in of infections is threatening safety and it's threatening the health for on-site, we will take action to return those personnel back to telework only status. So we are open and looking at the data to see if we move back to a more conservative position with respect to on-site work. The decisions will be made using the same data-driven, risk-based methods that got us to our decision of where we are now in stage 3. But we know that the precautions we took from the beginning, going to stage 4 early, definitely made a difference. We were conservative, and it's really paid off in terms of the low numbers of cases for the Marshall team. Back to you, Jody.
All right. Thank you, Paul. So many of the questions that we received were in regard to telework and returning to the work site. So I'll begin with one of the first questions. It says, do you foresee any work areas remaining in a telework status as we move to different stages? Well, I can tell you right now, as far as where we are with telework, right now we are planning for mandatory telework. We're in mandatory telework for those who can. So even as we go through different stages stage 2, stage 1. We will still be highly encouraging telework for those who can telework because we found out it works. Plus, again, we're finding out that we can definitely be proactive and be very productive in our work. So this means for many of us, the majority of us, for the office workers, that will be doing telework longer than those that we do turn on the work for them to be approved to come on site because they cannot do their work any other way. Many of you had also asked if we had a plan on expanding our September no earlier than return to on-site work date. So when we communicated in the fall that the fall was the baseline of that we would be returning to the work site no earlier than in the fall, we knew that that was one of the critical things that we wanted to communicate to the workforce on because we wanted you to be able to make some personal plans. We knew that it was getting close to school coming back on. We knew that we were encouraging many of you to take your annual leave, which we still are. Again, remember the burnout. We wanted you to take care of each other, but we also wanted to give you a little bit of an opportunity to be able to plan your personal life. We also know that we need to stay flexible. There's so many things that we can't predict. As we're watching the local environment, we're watching what the schools are doing. We're working and seeing how our families are affected. Uh, we're doing work, as we said, that can be done on site. We're seeing the productivity of it. We see a lot about the demands of our employees at home that are included folks that are taking care of small children or loved ones. So we will still continue for your safety and for productivity. We'll continue to encourage telework for all of those who are in those situations. As far as when we might move from other stations or other stages, I could tell you I don't truly have the answer. The virus and controls a lot of what we're doing. We're monitoring it. And then also, we'll be working with our state and local governments and also NASA headquarters as we go through the different stages and based on being able to turn on work and making it safe for our employees, as well as all the things that Paul has described and what Steve has described as far as what it takes to be safe. We'll make sure we follow those protocols. And again, I can't stress enough, as we do bring people on board, it will matter your own total responsibility for your safety, following the protocols, washing your hands, wearing the mask, being smart, and again, not coming on site if you're requested to come on site when you don't feel well. So I'd like to go through a little bit more, but I'm going to ask that Steve join me again to speak to the other decisions we're still working on, which includes activity for long-term telework. So Steve, if you could help me describe a little bit more about our protocol and what we expect as we continue in telework.
Sure, Jody. Yeah, I know there is a potential for the fact that we could have prolonged telework. We've already been in for those that are doing telework, already had several months of telework, and so that's definitely on people's minds about the prolonged telework. So we do have a group that has been formed to look at our telework practices and to start thinking about recommendations for telework longer term. And when I say longer term, I'm talking about what I call the post-pandemic telework practices that we may be moving toward at Marshall. And so we have formed a Marshall expanded telework planning team that's in work now. And it's going to be looking at telework across all of the center and where it's applicable, whether some folks may be able to telework for a few days a week. Some of us may even telework more than that. And so in terms of permanent telework, we're using the flexibility that we already have under the agency's telework policies, so that rather than being in a mandatory telework, which is what we're in now, we would be looking for I would say post-pandemic, after that we're no longer have mandatory telework in place, what telework makes sense? What kind of work makes sense to be done teleworking? What are employees comfortable doing teleworking on a voluntary telework basis? And the other thing is that we're also looking at just expanding, like I say, expanding telework. So our Marshall expanded telework planning team is in work. They're going to be working on that with the various organizations at the center to see how we want to move forward with that. And we are looking at that in terms of, again, it's a little bit, I know it's probably for me, definitely, and maybe for some of you too, it's a little bit hard to even envision how telework would work in a post-pandemic world, because we're so much fully into telework right now with mandatory telework, and there's so many other facets of our lives that are changed and restricted because of the pandemic. And so we're also taking a look at it from that point of view too, that in a post-pandemic world, it wouldn't be as though everyone is trapped in their homes, 24 hours a day waiting for the pandemic to end.
Okay. Also, Steve, I know there have been a few questions that about 4200. There's been several folks that have seen that we did some investigation of 4200, the building 4200, and a couple of folks asked us some question of what's going on with 4200. Uh, what's expectations? Will it be demolished? Will it be repaired? What is happening? But if you could kind of go through a little bit of the 4200 history, so for the folks that don't know what I'm talking about, and then let's talk a little bit about our plans forward, which obviously are still in work.
Sure thing, Jody. Yes. For those of you may not have been aware, we did have a panel, part of the external skin structure of the 4200 building had a panel become dislodged back in May, and it was, of course, unexpected that it fell off of the building, came off and landed, and of course weren't expecting that. And when we took a little bit closer look at it, we realized that we needed to do a greater, more thorough inspection and investigation of the entire exterior of 4200, or at least some representative sample areas of the panels on the exterior of 4200. As a result of that, looking into that a little bit more and doing a little more investigation into the panels and looking at the age of 4200, which is on 60 years plus, it has caused us to really look at 4200 and the safety of 4200, not so much from the integrity of the overall building, but the safety of the building from an exterior structure point of view. So because of that, and because of the questions we have about the security of that external skin of the building, we've closed off all of the entrances to 4200 except the southwest area of the basement loading dock, where you can go in through that door that's by the loading dock in the basement. That's the only area that's available for entry and exit out of 4200 right now. We have already relocated the end user services office space bar, what we call the space bar. We've already relocated that to the activities building, and we are looking at options for 4200. On one area that we're looking at is securing and making sure that there's not a danger of panels falling, or that if any other panels were to become dislodged, like in a wind event or anything, that they will be saved. And so we're looking at some options for how to secure the exterior of the building. We also are looking at the overall plans for the center are within our master plan guidelines and within our total C of F building footprint. So we're looking more broadly at 4200 as well, and exploring those options and plans for our center infrastructure. Does that help, Jody?
That does, and hopefully now when people see the tape around 4200, if they weren't already aware of it, you understand what's going on. And again, that's another thing for your own safety. Even if you have supervisory approval to be in 4200, make sure you use the correct entrance, and please observe all the hazards and barriers that are there for your own safety. And as Steve said, we're evaluating 4200 and what will be the safe protocols to make sure, as we do and able to get more and more folks on site, we'll understand 4200 and what we need to be doing. So more to come on that, and we'll keep people posted on that. The next question I'm going to have is I'm going to send it to Larry, because Larry, I know like you and many of the supervisors who have been on site, you have seen firsthand a lot of the activity and experienced it since you have one of the largest workforces at Marshall Space Flight Center in your organization. I think it's important not only to you, but to your team. We give a big shout out for all the folks that are working on site, the supervisors, the team leads, and the people doing the job, because all of y'all have done a tremendous job of keeping everyone briefed, up to speed, and keeping us safe. And to me, that's what's making a difference in us going forward. So, Larry, the question for you I have is that was written is, are the safe at work protocols working? I haven't heard any more about COVID cases at Marshall. So, Larry, if you'd answer it, thanks.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jody. Thanks for the shout out. Also, know the folks in engineering and across the center appreciate that. The quick answer to your question and the encouraging answer to your question is yes, the protocols are working. We in engineering, of course, have a small percentage of work being done on site at Marshall right now. And of course, there's other orgs that do as well. And we're all trying to work together to keep each other safe by rigorously following these protocols that all of us have mentioned here today. I know folks also are interested and we're often asked about the number of cases, positive cases that we've had at Marshall. And I have a little bit of data I would like to share with the group today. So since March 13th, when we all went to mandatory telework, except for a few folks. Marshall has identified 14 reported positive cases. That's been across 5 civil servants and 9 contractors. And at Michoud, so far we've had 0 civil servants tested positive for COVID. At Michoud, we have had 38 direct support contractors and non-NASA tenant employees at the facility that have tested positive. But the good news is, based on what we've traced, we believe none of these positive cases were transmitted as a result of the on-site work that we were conducting either at Marshall or at MAF. Said another way, we believe these cases were not transmitted on site, but originated off site. Of course, we know we have more workforce coming onto the center. They are having to interact in the community and have the potential to become positive. We, of course, continue to stress that everyone be vigilant whenever your job requires you to come on site. This, of course, we believe this data represents that effective leadership and execution of our on-site personnel, their rigorous adherence to these safe at work protocols are working. And we've been able to continue a lot of this great work that Jody and others have talked about without transmitting the virus. And hats off again, as Jody has said, to our on-site workforce. Continue to do that. And that leads us actually to feel quite confident in our safe at work protocols. We don't want to let our guard down, as Jody just mentioned, but these things are working. And hats off to all of you that are doing that work. As a reminder again to us all, and I noticed all of us have mentioned it here today, but these are some of the things we continue to stress for an on-site workforce. Stay at home. If you or someone you live with are sick, wash your hands often when you're in the office, wear the face coverings, continue to social distance, avoid shaking hands. And also we've had to make arrangements with workflows and accomplishing tasks. We like to call that in our world, everybody is having to pay the COVID tax. We're having to go beyond the call of duty, if you will, to ensure that we are following these protocols. And as we continue to turn more work on site, more of these critical tasks, we are asking each employee to remain flexible in various ways. I think many of you already know sometimes we have to designate various entrances that we want people to come in a common building, but that way we can keep people separated. We are also having to try to keep numbers low by alternating work schedules. Sometimes we'll bring in crews a little earlier in the day and some later in the day to avoid having the numbers get too large for a particular building. And we'll continue to have to be innovative like that and flexible like that to continue that work. And we just ask that you guys continue to work with us, and you've been doing great at that. Our medical team at Marshall and the agency has created these protocols that we're working with the safety of the organization and of course the employees in mind. We're cleaning the facilities. Our facility guys are doing a great job on helping us work through any issues that we see or we have, and we continue. Even I think this last week we made some additional updates to our protocols that will be coming out and being implemented very soon. So we really appreciate everybody's feedback on how we can do better, and we are trying to implement those things. We can't say enough about how proud we are of this on-site workforce coming in each and every day and following these protocols. They do require the extra steps, extra flexibility, and also just that diligence in practicing these things. But I think it's important that we know that these small actions made each day, these rigorous adherence to these protocols, are going to keep us safe. It will just keep up the good fight, and one of these days we'll have this virus beat back, and we can continue to do this great work. I'm confident that what we know now and the practices we are implementing, we will be able to better mitigate risk going forward, and of course limit the spread of the virus. So with that, Jody, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. And again, I cannot stress a big shout out to the individual employees coming on site and what you're doing and how you're following the protocol. I also would tell you a big appreciation to the supervisors, team leaders, and a lot of our workforce that are working day in and day out to plan. You know, Larry described it and talked about the different shifting entrances, making sure the right protections in place, everything is there. Those type of discussions as Steve and the team, Preston, Jason, Adam, and all of our managers that come in and present the work that we turn on, that is a huge difference. And it is a very complicated and time consuming, but I'll tell you, it is so worth it because as a result of it, we know what people are doing. We understand the issues, and our managers and team leads, and there are several folks in the organization that I hope at some point in time to give them a big shout out by name that are truly being leaders within their organization and truly making a difference. And that is making a huge difference. The other thing that I'd like to cover is just a little bit more about some of the other things that we're doing, proactive steps that we're taking. I'm very proud to say that Marshall and the Michoud Assembly Facility are joining other NASA centers in a trial program that can help us in contact tracing those who have tested positive to the virus or been exposed. That is a very labor intensive activity to be able to trace and understand the different exposures. So, because of people wearing a trackable, wearable device, that is enabling us to be able to faster trace and faster understand the exposure and how we can proactively contact folks. So when an employee wears this device, we can capture the data on where they've come into contact with one another and for how long. For us, this is really exploring ways to keep our workforce safe and to make sure that we don't do unnecessary quarantining where we don't have to, but then when we do need to react, that we can do that traceability faster and get the right results. We're still undergoing small trials with small amount of employees wearing these devices, and NASA will still have to evaluate what we learn and make sure that we understand the impacts, understand what we need to do if we want to accept the device and how it would work. So I'd like to kind of pull just a little bit further, and Paul, I'm going to ask you on this theme. In talking about our workforce, You know, we have been talking about what we're doing for the safety of our workforce, addressing the COVID pandemic and understanding how we keep our workforce safe. I'd like for you to spend a little bit of time on talking on how we're addressing diversity issues, and if so, what are the mechanisms that we're also doing to address the diversity and inclusion initiative?
Yeah, so thanks, Jody. So the short answer to that question is, are we working it? Are we adjusting it? Are we ignoring it? The big answer, the short answer is yes, we are very concerned about diversity and inclusion. We're trying to work it as best we can within the context of a virtual environment. We've had a lot of discussions about it, but really the leadership and emphasis on the changes that we need is starting at the top of the center. We've seen the emails coming out from Jody. She's been leading some of the discussions. And we've had a number of these at the center level, but we've had these in the past also, in a sense that we're continuously over the probably last 5 years, we've had the bridge champions. You may have heard about those. The bridge stands for a bridge, right? It goes from point A to point B, it gets across something. But in this case, it stands for a blueprint to reinforce inclusivity and diversity to gain equity. And it really becomes the champions and the advocates for diversity and inclusion at the center. It's a group of folks that are the senior representatives from each directorate, and they report, they monitor, they plan the equity and diversity and inclusion across their organizations. They really become the advocates and the conscience of that organization with respect to D&I at the center. And they meet together in the group that I am champion of. And so we meet regularly and talk about these issues in an open forum. And it's a safe environment where we can say anything we want with no retribution. But again, these folks are the representatives and advocates and champions at the directorate and local level for diversity, inclusion, and equity. We have other initiatives across the center too, like the Unity campaign. You've heard about that, and that's Lucius talks about that. We have the Personnel Management Advisory Group, PMAC, that's been in existence for a couple of decades, and they make sure that awards and personnel actions are made in a very equitable and fair level. We have special emphasis groups, and we've heard those talk in small groups together. Meetings, we have conflict resolutions roundtable, and then we have an advisory working groups that actually advise senior leadership at the center from a minorities perspective. So we have these active groups reporting to center management and all management at the center. All these groups are using unique processes, and they reveal appropriate lack of inclusion if they find anything as it relates to awards, rotational assignments, and career development opportunities. They make any concerns known to leadership, and we make an attempt to correct those. That's the purpose of trying to get the data and make ourselves better as a team that advocates and really lives diversity and inclusion. And as center leadership, we're holding our managers responsible to continue the mentoring and developing of our Marshall team. So as we mature, we get younger people in, we want to grow and develop a culture of diversity and inclusion. And we have many other org-specific discussions that help promote unity. That's every action and every day. And as we say, equal opportunity and diversity and inclusion are part of everyone's mission here at Marshall. So we're listening to our workforce about how we can improve. We've had several Let's Talk discussions. We've had these at the advisory group discussions, and we will continue to have more of these. For those of you that have participated in these we've had so far, they've been led by ODEO and our HR group. We appreciate those of you that shared so openly. We understand that it's not necessarily easy to tell your story in a public environment, especially this virtual environment, but we do appreciate you sharing your perspective and the truths that you've experienced, because we all can learn from each other in these forums. And we are hearing you when we have these discussions, and we do plan to take action. And we'll continue to have more of these discussions, and you'll see some actions starting to formulate in terms of real proactive actions. So we at Marshall and at NASA are so committed to this that we've recently added inclusion to a list of its core values. And it's interesting, if we look at diversity and inclusion, we as a center have been emphasizing it quite a bit for the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of it led and began with Robert Lightfoot, including in basically a D&I initiative. But then as time went on, we really said, hey, we as an agency, really need to have inclusion as a core value of the agency. So that's now been added to its other baseline ones, which we all started with like 20, 30 years ago, which included safety, integrity, teamwork, and excellence. And now we've added inclusion. And we all agree that inclusion is a big part of accomplishing our mission, because we embrace this continuing effort where we nurture a place where employees feel welcome, respected, connected, and engaged. And in doing so, we've become a more productive team. And we know that diverse teams are much more effective in their decision making and their final results. So with that, really has been the emphasis on it, Jody, has increased, I think, in this time due to the social situation. And I think we're doing the best we can, but we expect to do more in the future.
Yes, and thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for a lot of your support. I know you have been very proactive in supporting mentoring as well as participating in all the meetings, and so has Steve. We really are, like you said, taking it very serious and learn and have learned. I know I personally have learned a lot from each of the sessions and will continue to do so. So we're learning every day. We're a learning organization, and to me, that's part of growing and becoming better. So, Steve, I'm about to rotate to you for a question. You heard me earlier talk about that we're watching our families. We're looking not only folks that are trying to telework from home, but that ones that are also having to take care of children or elder, and that there are definitely stressful situations that are ongoing as they're trying to do their telework. A question that we have received says, do you expect the 20 hours excused leave for childcare or elder care will continue into the foreseeable future? Steve?
Sure. Thanks, Jody. Yeah, the current provision that we have for the ability to use the 20 hours of excused leave for childcare or other caregiving, we have that good through the next month. And we also learned recently that OPM, Office of Personnel Management, is looking into a possible extension of that authority to allow us to continue to use up to 20 hours per pay period for this purpose. So we are looking at a possible extension of that. We have not heard back yet positively from the Office of Personnel Management, but we're definitely keeping tabs on that, the status of that provision. And as well, we're looking at what flexibility NASA can provide our workforce. And so we'll, regardless of whether or not that authority is extended by OPM, we will continue to adopt and encourage the maximum flexibilities possible that we can with our workforce. And also, I just wanted to remind everyone on the current guidance on this and other topics related to coronavirus response is on the coronavirus response information webpage, which we've talked about before. I'll just remind you, it's at nasapeople.nasa.gov/coronavirus. Again, it's nasapeople.nasa.gov/coronavirus. Back to you, Jody.
Okay, Steve. So, Paul, I'm going to move this question to you. You heard earlier a question that I said that we had gotten a lot about when we would return to work and about telework. And Steve also brought up some conditions that we've learned more and more as we have gone through the COVID. We've learned the teleworking. We're learning about some flexibilities. We're learning a lot more as we go forward. So this specific question talks about protecting those who are at risk. The question is, do you foresee allowing employees with pre-existing conditions to convert to a permanent telework status? Paul?
Yes, that's an interesting question, Jody. Good question. We know this virus is aggressive, right? And it tends to hit people who have pre-existing conditions harder than others. So it's interesting. I live on a street that's got a large population of older people, and they are very self-protective and not moving. And I think it's very wise, because if you have a pre-existing condition, this is not anything you really want to mess with in terms of this virus. So even if telework is no longer mandatory, say hypothetically we move from stage 3 to stage 2, we do intend to provide the flexibility for employees with pre-existing conditions until we reach stage 1 to stay at home and until we get to stage 1 of the response framework. So at this time, employees who have high risk under COVID-19 guidelines, they're encouraged to stay at home and remain in telework status and should not feel the need to participate in any of the ongoing or planned restart activities. We also understand their concerns about the demands of teleworking or on-site when balancing the demands at home. Steve talked about these, sometimes caring for elderly parents, elderly family, children, schooling at home. A lot of these demands will may require us to telework in addition to the pre-existing conditions. And in some respects, the pre-existing conditions of your family somewhat become a part of your environment as an employee. So we really want to make every effort to protect you while you're still providing what you need to do your job. Also, we want you to speak up if you don't feel safe. Okay, we've always said that if you don't feel safe, say so. So now this applies not only to safety actions, but safety with respect to the COVID environment. And we understand that employees with high risk health conditions must make a personal risk decision whether to return to work if they are asked to do so, or whether to remain in a telework environment. So that will be a personal decision as a function of how those people see their particular risk posture. But any employee who has health factors which may place them at a higher risk category should engage with their supervisor and talk to them to determine out what would be appropriate and how to continue teleworking, or if you may require another workplace modification. So we're open to that as a team too. And employees who have a medical disability that may also request, they can put those requests to the reasonable accommodation process. And in that case, they contact their supervisor in the center EEO office. So we have a lot of avenues to help people here, and we expect to see a lot of that flexibility for pre-existing conditions until we get back to stage 1.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. The next question, Steve, we're getting close to the end of our questions, but I was going to say this question is really addressing the entire family of our workforce. You know, we have a civil service workforce and WIEs and contractors, and we're one big team working together on our mission. So this specific question is really addressing more about the contracts and contractors and how we can continue to keep them working. So the specific question is, will Marshall continue to pay the contracts for the contractors to continue working due to the COVID, even though the work and travel is not what it used to be? Steve?
Sure, Jody. Yeah, our procurement office has been working hard to make sure that the contractors are paid throughout the pandemic. And in fact, that makes me want to pause for a minute and just send out a huge shout out to our procurement, all of our procurement members that are supporting all of the Marshall procurements, our procurement team, the leadership of that office, Jason Detko and Todd, and just the supervisors, the contracting officers, all of the folks in procurement that have been working hard to make sure that contractors are notified of the status and that they are notified of the procedures for continuing work and for continuing to receive payments under their contracts. And so it's just been quite an involved and very detailed and diligent process that was needed, and they have really knocked it out of the park. So a huge kudo to our procurement office. And as everyone has seen, we've set up mechanisms to try to minimize the impact to the team. And going forward, we will continue to want to minimize the impacts as best as possible under the authority that we have and as much flexibility as we have under our contracts. So I do recognize, obviously, that work has changed greatly as we transition to mandatory telework. Many of our contractor members are also on telework. But I'm really proud of what our teams, both the civil servant and contractor members, are doing to keep our missions going, to keep all of our work and our critical work especially supported. And so I think we'll expect to see more of that. And like I say, wherever there's a possibility of doing something in a flexible way to make sure that the contractor work continues, that's what we will endeavor to do.
Thank you, Steve, and really thanks all of you for joining me today and helping me address these questions. I know with the workforce, we were able to answer many of the questions. If by chance you submitted a question and you did not hear the answer to it, that is one of the things that we will be doing. We'll be posting some answers on our fact sheet. And so I just want to say so much. Again, I hate naming organizations. I love naming organizations, but I hate because I'm always afraid I'll miss out on someone. You know, we've talked about the mission essential, the procurement, the facilities folks, the IT folks, the cleaning, all of this to the engineering work, the program office work, financial work, the legal, you name everything in a piece, Office of Human Capital, everything we're doing to keep Marshall Space Flight Center vibrant and going. I just really appreciate because it takes a team to make all this happen. And as much as I would love to be out there and talking to each and every one of you, I'm having to, restrain myself from running to run and hug everyone. I soon look forward to being able to do that. But I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for joining us today and being part of this discussion. And I really appreciate the folks that submitted questions. And we'll be making sure that if you do want some more answers, want some more questions, we'll be doing this some more. We want to hear from you. Please keep your supervisors informed. Please submit your questions. And like I said, we'll be updating our fact sheet. Will be provided on Inside Marshall later this week. We'll also be sharing our Stage 3 transition plan on Inside Marshall so that you can read a little bit more about the details. A lot of the things that Steve and Paul and Larry and I covered that talked about how we were turning on work, what our decision process was, what we're looking at, how we're making the decisions, and really, again, the safe protocols of how we can make it work and make it safe for turning on more and more work as we go through this unprecedented time. I hope our discussions today with you were very informative. We are trying to be as transparent and open. I encourage you to stay engaged again with each other. Look out for each other. Know your signs of burnout. Uh, Make sure that you stay informed, in touch, and definitely follow the protocols, no matter whether you're on site or teleworking or in a social environment. Wash your hands, do the social distancing, the facial cloth, making sure you follow that because we want you to stay safe. And we also want, as we're turning on work, for it to remain safe. So my favorite phrase is keep rocking. You're doing a great job. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in person. And I'll tell you, I'm looking so forward to being back to Marshall Space Flight Center. Again, I've always said we're working hard, but to be on site working hard. And I'm so proud of each and every one of you. I know this is a different time. It can be frustrating, but I will tell you, I cannot believe the amount of work that we're still accomplishing every day and making our mission go forward. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for all your leadership. Thank you for taking care of each other. And thank you just for being you. And so until next time, I'm Jody Singer. I've got a great team with me. Thank you for all you do. And please have a nice, safe day. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.